Hello, I'm Anja. Welcome to my greenhouse, and in particular my green kitchen. Today we're cooking a vegan ramen, which I'm really excited about. Part of the reason I chose this dish is that the Scandinavian spring is so unpredictable. The other day it was snowing here and even hailing, and yesterday it was quite warm. So it's still a bit early to go for the completely summery dishes. I think we still need that warmth, and especially when we're sitting out late at night outside, and those warm flavors. So the vegan ramen it still has a lot of nutrition and it's kind of healthy comfort food, which I also think with the pandemic we shouldn't underestimate the need for something comforting and soothing, which also gives us energy. So to clarify, I'm not a vegan myself, but I love cooking vegan food as often as possible, also for my two boys, who are sometimes skeptical, but actually for this dish they really loved it, and they asked for second servings and even thirds. So I hope your kids will enjoy it too. And I would like to debunk some myths about vegan food. The first one is that it's tasteless. You might like rabbit food. You might picture gnawing on a raw carrot. It's not very tempting. The other is that it doesn't have enough protein, which is also exactly that, a myth. So luckily these are giving way to more insight and more inspiration, and that's also part of my mission to show that it can be really yummy and really nutritional and really good in every way, also for the planet. And science has shown now that the single most effective thing we can all do for the environment is to cut down on our meat consumption. If you eat dairy or eggs or fish or even meat, you don't have to cut it out completely, but maybe reduce it a little bit, eat more plant-based meals, then we're all doing our share. And I think it shouldn't be difficult, basically. So let's get started with the food. We'll start with making the special ramen broth, which you can also make the day before. Then the flavors will get deeper. But it's also quick enough that it's no problem to make it the same day. It's more or less 10 minutes. So I'll start with chopping the spring onions in thin slices, partly separating the white and light green from the dark green. So I'll use the dark green as garnish at the end. So a lot of green for this dish. Then the garlic. And we will not chop the garlic cloves, but instead just crush them a little bit with the back of the knife to make them open and make the flavors come out a bit more in the broth. Like this. Like this. The part of the reason I'm also not chopping them is that we're going to take them out from the broth, so they will be easier to fork out afterwards. So 3 cloves is fine for a portion for 2. So if you're making this for 4 people, then just double everything, obviously. Like this. I will put the heat on, medium to high heat. Even if I'm not only making this for 2, I'm using a quite large kettle to have room for everything. I'm using, this is an organic sunflower oil. You can use any plant oil really, but this is quite neutral in taste. So while I'm waiting for the oil to heat, I'm also cutting the ginger. I normally try to find most of the vegetables organic, but actually I'm doing an exception for ginger, as I think organic ginger is they're really small and they're really hard to peel. So I'm peeling this one, and the same as with the garlic, I'm not going to cut it in tiny pieces or grate it, but instead just make a couple of large chunks because they will also be removed later. So the recipe says thumb size, I guess this is more or less it. Yeah, so I'm just cutting it in 3 like this. Let's see if this is heating up. Yeah, so I will put everything in there. Not those bits, obviously. And yeah, just saute them lightly for around 2 minutes. It needs a little bit more heat, this pot, but yeah. And while you're doing that, if you use dried shiitake, that's completely optional. It's quite a traditional part of making ramen, but I made it without the other day, and it more or less tastes the same. It tastes really good without too. So if you're using it, we will saute those as well after this has been on for a couple of minutes. They will also be removed, so that you can just keep them whole, or you can just skip them. That's also completely fine. So they're starting to warm up. So now these have been in here for around 2 minutes. So I will add the shiitake mushrooms. Again, if you don't have them, you can just keep stirring. And you can even put the stock in a little bit sooner. While I'm waiting for those, I'm going to make the stock. So I boiled a liter of water and been cheating a little bit. You might need to boil it first. And my this thing doesn't have room for exactly a liter, so I will start with 800 milliliters and just add a little bit more to get a liter. If you're cooking for 4 people, you will use 2 liters. So I use a good organic vegetable stock. I recommend to use one of high quality, but that's up to you, of course. So for 1 liter, I need 2 spoons. And I need to remember to add those last 200 milliliters at the end. Stirring a little bit more in the mushrooms and garlic and ginger and spring onions. Then I will add this. And the remaining part. I can turn up the heat a bit so we get it to boil. I'm also going to add some soy sauce. 2 tablespoons. I'm using, as I have celiac disease, so I can't have any gluten, I'm using tamari, which is gluten-free soy sauce. It's fermented and it's also a bit less salty. I actually think it tastes better. But that's optional. If you can handle gluten, you can use the normal one. I'm using 1 tablespoon of maple syrup as well. This is optional, but makes it slightly sweeter in a natural way, which is also good for you. So I think it gives a nice rounded flavor. And the most important thing in this broth is actually the miso paste. So I'm using brown miso, based on brown rice. 1 large tablespoon is enough. Yeah, it's a little bit much. And now it's boiling. So we will let it boil for 10 minutes. You can use a lid if you want to and just turn the heat down. Or you can leave it open. That's up to you. I actually need to scrape this off. So the miso paste gives it a really, really deep umami-rich flavor. If you're not a fan of the taste, you can of course leave it, but it's quite central in the ramen recipes. And while this, I will turn the heat down a bit now. While this is boiling, I will start frying the oyster mushrooms and the pak choi and the tofu in a pan with some more sunflower oil. Actually, I'm adding one more thing to the broth, which is also completely optional. This is called kombu. It's a Japanese sea vegetable, which is very healthy. You can also use Norwegian or Scandinavian seaweed. And this was a tip I learned from a friend. It's also going to be taken out, but it's really healthy and it gives a kind of, more sea-like flavor. So I need to just rinse it briefly. And just add it in there as well. So that should be all. 10 minutes, it doesn't matter. If you have more time, it can also boil longer. It just makes the taste deeper. So I think the pan is starting to get hot. Ever so slowly. So first I'll start with sautéing some oyster mushroom, which are also really full of umami. Umami is known as the fifth taste. It has this deep, almost meaty taste. Think mushrooms, tofu, even red wine. And especially for meat eaters who want to cut down on the meat consumption but still crave meat, then it's really essential to have umami. That's part of the reason I chose it for this dish. If some of you eat meat a lot, then you will hopefully be surprised of how deep the flavor gets. My kids they love meat and they just love this. They were really surprised of the darkness of the dish. So I'm shredding them just with my fingers. They're really easy to pull together in a quite clean way. So you don't really need to use a knife. They're also really healthy. They're packed with amino acids and fibers. And has this really particular texture, and I just love them, and they're good for us as well. So I will just saute those, fill the pan. Again, if you prefer shiitake and you didn't have dry shiitake, you can use fresh shiitake instead of oyster mushrooms. That's up to you. And I almost get this kind of autumny feeling from the smell, but it's really starting to smell really nice. You can fry those for a couple of minutes until they start to get brown, and they will also shrink. So this might look like a lot for two people, but they will become a lot smaller. The broth is still cooking. So, I'm really, like you might have understood, I'm really a fan of umami, especially in vegan food. And this dish has so much of it. It's like the umami dish, I would say. So it's quite quick. They're starting to shrink and they're starting to become brown and more textured. I can turn down the heat a little bit. And while they're in the pan, I will prepare the tofu. This is organic tofu, which makes there's no risk of GMOs. It's quite firm. That's also a question of taste, what you prefer. You could use the more silken version, but I really like this firm version. So I will cut it open. I will use 2/3 of this, more or less. And you can choose whether you want to slice it or dice it. I'm going to go with dicing right now. So here I have 1 big tablespoon of corn flour, which I will use. This is also optional really, but I use it to coat the tofu dices to make them a little bit more deep fried. So I will just put that in there and use a spoon to toss them around to try and coat them as much as possible. You don't really need to season either the mushrooms or the tofu as the soup has so much flavor. You can lightly salt them if you want to, but it's not necessary. So yeah, they're quite well covered now. A little bit more. And I will set the mushrooms aside. They're done now. Starting to get this brown, like quite firm texture and brown coloring. I will just leave them here to make room for the pak choi and for the tofu. The pak choi you can also cook it lightly in the broth if you prefer, but then it needs a really little time before it gets too wilted. So I'm actually choosing to fry it today. So this is it's also called Chinese white cabbage. It's you can quarter it or you can share it in half. I think I will actually, this was quite small, so I will actually just divide it in half. It's really beautiful, I think. So I'm putting the cut size down and frying them lightly, maybe just 1 minute, so that you see that it's wilting a little bit like you would with spinach, for example, but not too much. It still needs to be quite firm. And the broth is becoming really, really flavorful and almost ready to get the noodles. Yeah, I will turn the heat up a little bit here. Pak choi is also a really cool vegetable. In Norway we won't find them everywhere, but they are accessible in well-stocked supermarkets, and it looks really cool, I think, and it's really healthy as well. It's full of antioxidants and fiber as well. Try to turn it over. Yeah, maybe 2 minutes is good, depending on the heat. But you can see the leaves are starting to wilt. And the cool thing now with the kombu is, you saw it was quite a small piece earlier, and now you have this big sheet, which you will remove, but it looks really cool. It looks like the algae you would find in the ocean in summer, really. Oops, I'll just use this to turn it over. Yeah, this is almost done. Let's see. Next, going in the pan is tofu. I'll let it fry a little bit more, actually. I'm going to set it aside now along with the mushrooms to fit the tofu. And even use a little bit more oil to get that fried feeling. Just pour that in there. And yeah, more or less 2-3 minutes on each side. So while we're waiting for the tofu to cook, I will put the noodles in the broth. And when it comes to noodles, again with the gluten, I can't have normal ramen noodles, but you can use normal ramen noodles you find in every supermarket. Or you can go to an Asian supermarket and go for the fresh udon noodles, the really thick, wheaty ones. I found this quite cool type of rice noodles. You can use normal white rice noodles, or you can use brown rice noodles. These have brown rice and even wakame, which is another sea vegetable. So, which you get that I'm kind of a geek about sea vegetables. So I'm gonna pour them in. So maybe 3. Yeah, I'll use more or less half. These are divided in 3, so I will divide this in 2 for 2 portions. And normally you can also cook the noodles separately. I think the good thing about doing it together is that they won't stick, and you just have to make sure they're not overcooked. So the last maybe 3-4 minutes, depending on what kind of noodles you use, you pour them in the broth for the final cooking time. And yeah, remember to taste so they're not overcooked. So I'm turning these over to get them fried on at least 2 sides. You see they get this brown texture. And the cool thing is also when you put them in the broth, in the soup, they also get more firm. So they get this extra nice texture when they're inside the soup. I think, at least. So yeah, they're done soon. And I just realized that I forgot one thing. That was to pick out the mushrooms and the garlic from the broth before I would pour in the noodles. So sorry if you all did the same as me, but it's still definitely possible to do it. It's just ideally, it would be even easier before the noodles. But I'm just taking out. And when you do it before the noodles, you can also sift it into a separate clean pot if you want, but it's quite simple with the spoon. So I'm just picking out the mushrooms and the really big wakame sheet. Oh. Like this. And luckily the ginger pieces, the chunks and the garlic, it's all floating up. So it's actually quite easy even if the noodles are inside. So I was a bit saved there. So, and the spring onions you will just keep in there, of course. So, almost done. Yeah, I think this is it, and turning the heat down a little bit on the tofu. So I will taste the rice noodles to make sure they're not completely overcooked. Or not overcooked at all, really. So I kind of like this greenish color. Again, I went to a health food store to find these, but there are a lot of nice noodles to choose from. So I will. Yeah, they're almost done. Maybe 1 more minute. So I will turn off the heat of the tofu and set it aside. So that one's ready. The broth is almost ready. This is the leftovers from the broth. The mushrooms and the pak choi is sitting there waiting to land in the soup. And I will prepare the bowls. So yeah, medium-sized bowls is good to fit everything in and also the toppings. Let me see. So, oh, I found another ginger chunk. And it's no crisis at all. If they land in the soup, you will just pick them out. No worries at all. So it's more or less done. What I will do is just put the pak choi. This is quite big. Again, you can take just half one or a quarter. Like this. I will take some of the mushrooms and save some for the top. almost done. I hope you guys are tagging along and that you're more or less at the same pace as me. And again, the broth can cook shorter or longer. It's just if you add the noodles, then you have to make sure it doesn't overcook. So this should be it. And I will just pour it. It's quite a rich portion for each. So it might even be enough for 3. I will try and divide it quite equally. It smells really, really good here. So a little bit more. This one. It's really a lot of taste and a lot of yumminess. So I will add the tofu. Try and keep a bit of the crispiness. Oh. And the rest of the mushrooms. And we're almost ready for the funniest part, I think, which is the topping. So it looks quite yummy, don't you think? This was a bit big for the pot, or for the bowl. So for toppings, you can choose between a lot of things. I suggested at least 5 different toppings. I'm going to use them all. You can also, just pick whatever you like. You can also use super thinly sliced carrot sticks, a bit of red cabbage, fresh bean sprouts. There are a lot of options. But I'm using fresh coriander. You can also cut it with a knife, but I'm using it quite roughly like this. And I love coriander. I know coriander apparently is a bit of a love-hate thing. Not everyone. Some can't stand it and some love it. So I'm the latter category. And some fresh or some toasted sesame seeds. You can also use white ones, or you can leave them, again, depending on what you prefer. And some sriracha, which is chili sauce. This is yellow chili. It's quite strong, so maybe go a bit easy on the kids. And a little bit of sesame oil. And finally, the green part of the spring onions. Just slicing them very thin. Just drizzling them over. So yeah, the ramen is finished. I really hope you enjoy it. We're actually going to make a little dessert. So the dessert we're making is super, super quick. You can also make it as a snack on a weekday, maybe just one for yourself or 2 or 3. I'm making a little dessert now. So I will have maybe, I don't know, 6, 7. So I'm buying organic dates from Englemark because they're really soft and juicy. But you can also use the big, more traditional, drier ones with the stone. And if you have a stone, you just remove the stone and you replace it with the filling. These ones are quite small and don't have a stone, so I don't have to remove anything, but I will try to slice them open without completely wrecking them. And dates are really rich in fibers and also something called polyphenols, so they have a lot of nutrients. they have really naturally high sugar content, but it's completely natural. It's no added sugar at all. So, and when they're this juicy, it's almost like, you know, it's confectionery or caramel or something. So I personally love that. I'm also using almond butter. Actually, I'll start with the frozen raspberries. You can also use fresh raspberries, of course, but I think, I don't know, I prefer the contrast with the frozen kind of crisp texture and the room tempered dates, but that's completely optional. So fresh also works, and if you're using frozen, you should make them just before you're eating them. So ideally maybe after the main course, but they will keep fine also when you eat the soup first. So it's not room for that much. I'm just crumbling them a bit. I think it also looks kind of cool that it's a bit rustic like this. And it's super easy to make. It's a little bit messy, but you don't really need a lot. The whole dessert has 4 ingredients. So roughly like this. I'll just wash this off. And the almond butter is also, you can use peanut butter, but I prefer almond butter. It's also very nutritious and very kind of runny. You can try to fill them. You can also pour it over if that's easier. I'm doing a little bit of a mix. Almond butter is also really good for like smoothie bowls or almond porridge, or because it also has really a lot of natural, really good fat, so it keeps you full for longer, and it's really, it has this dessert feeling, even if you're using it for breakfast. So you can even have these for breakfast, actually, if you're feeling a bit indulgent in the weekend. So, and this is optional depending on how much you like licorice, but I'm using a bit of organic licorice powder as well, which also, like the raspberries, has a lot of antioxidants, and yeah, is completely natural. So I'll just sprinkle it over. You can also use cocoa powder if you prefer that. And yeah, they're ready to eat. Thank you for joining our little cook-along. I hope you enjoyed it as much as me. And of course, you're welcome to visit my greenhouse.eco at any time. Now let's slurp away. Bon appétit, or whatever they say in Japanese.